Hello everyone, and welcome to Rad the first therapeutic radiographer-led oncology podcast. Welcome to podcast number 32. My name is Naaman Anderson, and I'm joined by my fellow host, Joe McNamara.
Hi everyone.
A big thank you to our last guest, Linda Thomas, who discussed her role as CEO of Macmillan Cancer Support. If you haven't had a chance yet, please do go and take a listen. So, we are pleased to introduce our guest for this evening, Charli Parvin, who's going to be discussing the transition from therapeutic radiography student to Band 5 newly qualified member of staff in the NHS. Hi, Charli.
Hiya.
So, Charli, please can you tell us a bit about yourself, and if you feel comfortable, why you chose therapeutic radiography as a career?
Certainly. So, as you've rightly said, my name's Charli. I am studying therapeutic radiography. Well, my degree is radiotherapy, but therapeutic radiography as a postgraduate at the University of Liverpool. I did my undergrad a while ago, back at the University of Leeds in microbiology. I got into the whole radiotherapy sphere because I've been working in the NHS for what feels like eons, but probably to some people is not at all. But after my undergraduate degree, there wasn't really any chance for career progression. And so I was looking out and thinking, well, I could go and study for a couple of years, become a biomedical scientist. I'd do that maybe part-time, do the top-up modules because my undergraduate degree wasn't accredited. And I've always had a sort of interest in oncology and healthcare and stuff like that. And so I happened to see the radiotherapy PG DIP course advertised in Liverpool, and I thought, well, that's really cool, actually. Getting to speak to patients, build that bond with patients, make a difference. That old cliche, make a difference in patients' lives. But it was that sort of fine line between being very, very much involved with the patients and doing lab work, which I had done kind of in the middle, and I'm really glad I made that choice. I'm really, really glad, particularly because I'm coming to the end of my my degree, as Naaman said, and I've just secured my first Band 5 role.
That sounds really exciting. So where is your new job going to be at?
So I am one of the lucky people who gets to help kind of set up a new centre. So those of you who have a finger on the radiotherapy pulse may be aware that the Christie have got a new satellite centre that has just opened. So they haven't opened for radiotherapy just yet. They are due to be opening, but I am going to be one of the Band 5s starting work at the Christie at Macclesfield, just awaiting an exact start date and stuff like that, but I'm still on placement at the moment, so it's not a major rush.
So Charli, for anyone out there who doesn't know what a satellite centre is, can you talk us through what that is?
So that's a very good question, and you know what? I'm glad I actually know the answer to this one. So the Christie is a NHS trust sort of in and of itself, so it's not attached to the main site isn't attached to a separate hospital. It's sort of its own entity, and that's sort of the hub of the NHS trust. And then it has these spoke centres that sort of come off of it, which are attached to other sort of district hospitals. So there's one at Salford, there's one in Oldham, and there's now this one at Macclesfield. So it's a slightly smaller centre that might not have quite as much that's dedicated solely to that centre, but it's attached to a district general, so it's still got the access for the most part to sort of A&E and stuff like that. Macclesfield one is slightly bigger than the one at Salford, I believe, because this one has the capability to deliver chemotherapy as well as radiotherapy and potentially immunotherapy, although please don't quote me on that, she says on a podcast. But it just means that patients who are currently having to commute all the way into the centre of Manchester, which for anybody who's ever had to go to the centre of Manchester can be a delight at times. It just means that they've got access to a centre that's closer to them, and it just means that we're going to be able to open it up and help improve the lives of people further across the northwest and the sort of, I think, North Midlands as well. It's really
Oh,
exciting.
thank you for explaining that. And obviously, it would be great to have accessibility for radiotherapy. I know lots of radiotherapy departments are located within maybe oncology centres or within specific cancer hospitals, but that does mean, because of the specific requirements for the equipment, the dosimetry, the physicist requirement and their input, essentially that can mean that it's quite troublesome to be able to just implement radiotherapy into every cancer hospital or every trust. So satellite centres are a halfway house almost in being able to offer populations that accessibility to treatment. So Charli, tell us a little bit about kind of what you've been doing throughout your degree, because you're quite active on social media. You obviously get involved in lots of things that are extracurricular to your actual training. Do you want to talk us through kind of why you've got involved in that and maybe some of the things that you do?
So, kind of linking the radiotherapy with some of my extracurricular activities was via what I call Rad Twitter, which I'm sure other people do call it as well, but it's just because otherwise I get myself tongue-tied. I got involved in the Mars for Radiotherapy, which was Action Radiotherapy. I believe the charity's just
it has
changed
indeed
its
to
name.
Radiotherapy UK now.
Exactly. See, I do pay attention. But I got involved with that because I haven't always had a passion for running, but I've really found the benefits of running and getting outside and exercising particularly beneficial for my mental health, which was something that did take a bit of a pounding during this degree. But so I've got involved in that and kind of took a, I don't want to say like a leading role in our little Society of Radiographers student forum group, but I was sort of trying to help chivvy people along and stuff like that. But aside from that, when I've not been linking it to radiotherapy, I've run a couple of marathons for reasons that are still kind of unknown even to myself. Clearly, it's a slightly bonkers thing to do. I've also done Tough Mudders, which obviously were great. They came back last year, which is great. I've now done 62 of them. Had to think about that.
Wow.
And I don't normally have a scrape on my face. That's from playing rugby. I had a rugby match yesterday. I think it's something because I live by myself, and I've lived by myself for a while now, but particularly being someone who's slightly older than, the undergrads who are going through their course and stuff like that. Do you sometimes feel like a little bit isolated? And so getting out and keeping active, particularly from a mental health, that's been a really big thing for me. So yeah, I like to get out and I like to post things on Twitter quite a lot too, and the radiotherapy Twitter and diagnostics Twitter, the friends I've made, it's been fantastic.
Just going to say, if anyone's watching on our YouTube channel, Charli has very strategically placed all of her medals right behind, just to show off her achievements. I like it.
I totally didn't turn around the medal hanger specifically for that. No, 100% didn't do that.
No, it sounds good. And I mean, you talked about Master Radiotherapy. Joe was one of the founders of it, and it was an amazing challenge. And I'm looking forward to it happening again next year. Oh no, this year. Sorry, it's 2022. This year.
So Charli, you mentioned a little bit about mental health, and obviously only if you're comfortable in doing so, but why do you think it took such a hard hit during this degree? Do you think it was as a result of COVID, or do you think it is as a result of kind of working with cancer patients? Can you kind of put your finger on what it is that you think ensures that from our perspective, and maybe some of my experience of supporting students, we do see a high proportion of students with mental health issues? Do you think that that's as a result of what you've had to go through in terms of the pandemic, or is it more around kind of the role as a student in radiotherapy?
I definitely think there's no one clear cause that I could say is the main thing that's sort of rearing its head. I do think a lot of it is the destigmatization of mental health, is that probably a lot of people did have mental health issues. They just weren't I don't want to say willing, but they were sort of loath to admit it. They were embarrassed. They felt the stigma of it, you know, and that's one of the reasons why I'm trying hard myself to be such a big advocate for talking about mental health, because it's okay not to be okay. You know, it's all well and good being sunshine, happiness and rainbows, but you know, sometimes the people who are hurting the most are the ones with the biggest smiles on them. You know, you take a look at people like Robin Williams and, you know, Chester Bennington of Linkin Park. You know, that his widow put up a video of him, you know, laughing and smiling a couple of days before he took his own life. You know, so I think being open and honest about your mental health helps destigmatize and relieves the pressure on people to say, actually, do you know what, I am struggling. For me, it took me having a positive PCR test that came sort of out of the blue, like a routine one, and I went, I cannot be alone in my house for 10 days with my thoughts. I just completely spiraled down. I think it was just the thought of, you know, because we'd had quite a lot of our placement cancelled because of the, you know, because I started my degree in January 2020. Perfect timing, I know. It's just, anybody who knows me knows I've got amazing timing. Yeah, and so we were actually on summer holidays, but I was making sure I was going out. You know, this is when restrictions were being lifted, and thinking, I can't go out, I can't see people, I'm not going to talk to another human being face to face for 8 days. And it just made me go, I don't think I can do this. I really don't think I can cope, you know. And when I am on placement, I mean, obviously I think everybody looks forward to having a bit of a break so they can have a bit of a lie-in, you know, and relieve some of the pressure. But for me, it's going, I don't actually know the next time I'm going to speak to another human being face to face. You know, and it is my choice to live alone, but exercise and the getting out and that stuff for my mental health, it sort of made me go, oh my goodness, you know. And I suppose there is the fact that we are dealing with a very emotional career choice that we've made. You know, people always say, oh, isn't it depressing, you know, working in cancer care? No, it's not. It's lovely. You know, 9 times out of 10, it's amazing. And, you know, even if you're dealing with a patient who is palliative, you know, who isn't potentially in the best health, knowing that you've made a difference to them is fantastic. But there are the days where, you know, when your patient has to be concluded because they're not well enough to be treated, or you get that phone call that says, oh, you know, Mr. Bob's not going to be coming in, you know, because he's taken a turn over the weekend, and, you know, next thing you know, you're hearing that he's passed away. It can be emotionally draining, you know, the good and the bad. So I do think that being open about our mental health, you know, and stuff like that, you know, it can only benefit us by saying, actually, I am struggling, and then the whole a problem shared is a problem halved, you know. Putting it out there on Twitter and saying, I'm having a bad day, guys, you know, you don't have to go into it, just say, look, guys, I'm having a bad day, you know, or being able to get signposted to where you need to go to be able to have, you know, a slightly better time, or just someone go, hey, I'm here if you just need to rant and vent, or if not, I'll just send you a funny meme, because, you know, that's what we do, isn't it? We send funny memes, we send funny gifts to each other.
Yeah, and I think being a student, sometimes people forget when they're qualified staff that actually students can have the same problems as we do as staff members. And, you know, in a way, you've probably got a few more pressures because you've got deadlines on top of deadlines sometimes. I think the pandemic really highlighted how difficult it can be, especially in isolation. Obviously, lots of patients had similar experiences where they're only coming in for treatment and lots of uncertainty. But as you said, it's nice to share. And the Twitter world is actually quite nice, I would say. I know we've talked about it quite a lot in podcasts where they're very supportive, and, you know, Dr. Richard Simcock talked about the COVID papers and how it helped different sort of radiotherapy departments across the world just through posting on Twitter. So there's a lot to be said for
definitely.
it.
So Charli, do you want to talk to us a little bit about kind of that transition that you're starting to engage with now, going into your first ever role as a therapeutic radiographer? You know, what's it feeling like? What things are you worried about?
Well, you know, the joys of having a slightly precarious at times mental health does mean that there's a lot of anxiety about it. I suppose I'm reassured that because it's a new centre and it's going to be sort of starting up, not slowly, because I don't think anything ever happens slowly in radiotherapy, does it? But you know, they'll start to sort of ramp up the patients they have, and it's being a smaller centre. I feel like I'll have slightly more, not control as such, because again, there is a limited amount of control in radiotherapy with what's happening. But I do feel like I can just say, right, okay, I'm going to get hold of this, I'm going to get hold of that, and stuff like that. Knowing that there's 2 other people who are from my course who are also going to be joining as band 5s reassures me, because it's right people I know, because I think there's a lot of the fear of the unknown, you know, not knowing if you're going to necessarily gel with all the people that you work with, and stuff like that. I'm also, you know, because I'm coming from having placement at the site, well, the main site of the trust that I'm going to be working with, I'm quite familiar with a lot of the SAPs. Like, I know they're going to be using Electa machines, because if you gave me a Varian machine, I would probably just about be able to model my way through it, but I'm rather spoiled with my Electa. You know, I know how to use the OMS and stuff like that, so I'm reassured. It's still that moment of, oh my gosh, but having spoken to a lot of the band 5s and even the band 6s at my site, you know, hearing that you've got that, you know, preceptorship or the induction, depending on what your site calls it, is that, yes, okay, you do still have the power, like, you've got that sign in, and, you know, we're obviously adhering to IRMA and IRR regulations, but you do also always work with somebody. And, you know, I'm going to have a band 6 there who's going to be experienced, and I know a couple of the 6s who are going over, which again makes me feel a bit more like, right, okay, I can do this. I know that my university wouldn't have let me get this far without them thinking she must be at least somewhat competent. I'd like to think that the people I'm working with at my placement at the moment wouldn't let me switch on if they didn't think I was competent. And so thinking, well, actually, if they've got this confidence in me, why can't I have that confidence in myself? It's something I'm working on, definitely, you know, having a bit of self-belief. And there's always that moment where you just have a bit of a, oh goodness, I can't remember how to move the gantry, or, oh whoops, I put the bed the wrong way, you know, or I've moved it in rather than moving it out. But everybody makes mistakes, you know. There's some of the funny, you know, you hear something and people go, oh God, I did this, and oh, I did that. You're thinking, all right, okay, you're not expected to know exactly everything like that, you know. Yes, okay, there's going to be a bit of a step from going from a student to being a band 5, but it's probably not as big a step as I'm kind of making it out in my brain to be. I mean, I'll let you know when I've actually made the step, but maybe it's not this gaping wide chasm that I'm thinking it's to be. Maybe it's just like jumping over a puddle.
I always liken qualifying to learning to drive. So, you know, when you're learning to drive, you're behind the wheel, you're in control, but you know that someone can press the brakes for you. And you never have the radio on. You're not allowed to listen to music, and you've got to concentrate. And then when you qualify, and that first time that you're driving on your own, you know, it's such a vivid memory, I think, for a lot of people. Once that first drive on your very own, maybe it was mine because I almost crashed, but you know, it is a real vivid memory of being in that car on your own, listening to your music, going those 3 miles over the speed limit because you're like, oh, someone's not here to remind me that to go only 30 miles an hour. But it's so important, I think, to recognise that there will always be people there to support you. And you did mention preceptorship, which I think is really important, and something that I know the repair project and also the repair champions that were working for Health Education England were really looking to implement that preceptorship. Was that something that you kind of looked into and almost became part of a reason why you wanted to go there, or was it just a consequence of kind of starting in that centre?
Honestly, it was just a sort of a consequence of happening. I was very lucky in that this was the first job I applied for. I hadn't even thought about applying, and then we got a email from the education coordinator at our centre, who had been sent it by the centre lead, I believe, for Macclesfield, but I could be wrong. And he just sort of saying, well, why aren't any of the students applying for this job? And this was back in mid-October, maybe? And so obviously all the undergraduates who are in their third year wouldn't really be applying because they won't be graduating until a little bit later. And I sort of spoke to the other people at my site, and I thought, well, clearly they want students to apply for it. They wouldn't say, why aren't the students applying for it, if they didn't, potentially want students to apply for it. So even though, the job specification says, must have the HCPC registration, I thought, well, in for a penny, in for a pound, and it's just a bit of experience. And so I suppose I'm quite lucky in that I've got the first job interview I went for, and therefore I haven't really had to look around at other places. I do think having experience in that centre has reassured me that, and seeing people go through the induction setting at the main site has kind of reassured me that it's not this big, horrible, terrible thing that everyone likes to, say to scare you. It is there to make you a safe, competent, and a better radiographer. So, yeah.
That comfort feeling is quite nice, though, isn't it? I mean, when people apply for jobs, sometimes they might use a scattergun approach and apply to every Band 5 job there is in the country. But having that experience in the same, as you said, the standard operating procedures, so you know how things work, some of the people you work with, that comfort's really nice. I think especially if, you're a bit worried of maybe a bit about imposter syndrome, where people trust you, they know who you are, that's quite nice. But some people like that leap of faith, though, just to go to a completely different centre in a different part of the country. And I think for anyone listening who doesn't know much about the NHS, you can start as a Band 4, so waiting for the HCPC registration. That's what I did. So similar to you, Charlie, in the department I trained in, I managed to get a job there. But I started as like a Band 4, so there's just a few things you can't do. But then that while you're waiting for the HCPC, at least you're getting a bit of money into your pocket. You're not having to work on weekends like I did just to be able to go. So it's nice.
Charlie, have you thought about your long-term career pathway, or do you feel it's too early? I'm just intrigued because as a lecturer, we do always get students to start to think about long-term aspirations, role models and things like that. But it'll be interesting to hear from your perspective. Is that something that goes through your head, or are you literally at, woohoo, I'm nearly a Band 5 and that's it?
It's a little bit of both, I think. One of the main things about therapeutic radiography is that there is that sense of continual learning. CPD is such a critical part of it. I've been looking at the HCPC website today, in a bit of downtime, reading about the standards and, making the amount of emphasis that's placed on CPD. And that has sort of made me think that so the joys of my degree is that because it's a PG dip, it's effectively a master's without the dissertation, and I'm really keen to definitely do that dissertation. I've already got ideas of what I want to do it on. That may change. Definitely taking a bit of a break from the learning for at least a short period of time. It will just be nice to be able to turn my computer on just to, play some video games or watch YouTube rather than have to turn it on and, boot up Mendeley or EndNote or Microsoft Word.
You wait though, Charlie. I give you a month before you're itching to get started on your dissertation.
But definitely want to do my master's, get that dissertation, definitely get a Band 6 role, whether it's staying in the Manchester area, whether it goes elsewhere, depends where the jobs are at. I like the idea of becoming a specialist radiographer. So there's a few obviously at my site, but I like the idea of being able to have that a bit more of a link, rather than the oncologists and the doctors, you know, the registrars and stuff like that, having that link with people who worked like on set and have done the switching on and have that understanding. I really like that idea and that understanding of why we're causing potential side effects and late effects to our patients because of the nature of how we're treating them. I don't necessarily know which site I'd like to go for, you know. I think, you know, at the moment it's still very, very early on. You know, I've not even really started the career path aside from the degree. But I really like the idea of, you know, being able to get to know the patients a little bit more, you know, have that time to sit down and talk to them and make sure that they're getting that, you know, patient-centred care and that holistic care that they're needing, you know, and making sure that they are feeling as well supported as they can be. You know, I do like that idea.
I'm obviously quite biased, but it sounds like you want to be in review, Charli.
I mean, I like to talk. I don't know what what else to say aside from I like to talk, and I do like to talk to the patients, sometimes to my detriment.
No, I doubt it's to the detriment. I suppose being a mature student as well, Charli, do you think some of your life experiences before have helped in your kind of, well, role as a student and now transitioning into a Band 5?
I do, yeah. So having worked in healthcare, I think that I've maybe got a bit more experience in, you know, talking to patients and particularly talking about potentially upsetting information. You know, when a patient's getting worked up and emotional, I have that little bit of experience, which I do think's worked in my favour. You know, I've had the feedback that I'm good at talking to patients. I've worked in a dementia care home I've worked, you know, while I was at uni doing my undergrad. So when we've got patients who've got, you know, complex communication needs, particularly with dementia, or if they're somewhat more frail, you know, I do have that experience and I have been able to apply that. And that's not at all to say that somebody who is, you know, 18 years old, fresh out of school, won't be able to do that. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. It's just having had that experience. It's the, like, I can't remember what the word is, like transferable skills.
Yeah.
You know, having that experience, you know, I had to I couldn't remember what physics was when I started this degree, you know, so it's just someone who's just come straight from uni's got that over me. Gosh, I couldn't have told you what an electron or a neutron or a proton was at the start of this degree, whereas I have that experience of being able to talk to the patients and the life skills, you know. So I think it does even out between the undergrads, you know, people who can bend down and check the post pin slightly easier on the bottom of a bed.
Charli, you are not that old at all.
I'm 29. I'm plenty old.
So, Charli, obviously having experience of talking with other students, maybe linking through the Society College of Radiographers, what challenges do you think there are that students face that us as lecturers or clinical members of staff, practice educators, what can we do to support students better?
Oh, that is a good question. I think that overall, realising that not every student is going to experience university in the same way. You know, for some people, you know, for example, like undergraduates, this might be the first time they've ever lived away from home, so they might be having issues with that. You know, they may be going, you know, thinking, oh goodness, you know, I'm never going to be able to do this, stuff like that. Realising that mature students, you know, I don't want to say lucky that I don't have kids, because that implies that people who have children are unlucky. I don't have children, so I don't have to worry about childcare, for example. But, you know, with my cohort being a mixture of mature students, you know, people have got kids and they've got to factor in childcare, for example. And I think I've been very lucky in that my degree and my lecturers have been really understanding that, you know, people have got childcare commitments, you know, particularly if their kids have got doctor's appointments and stuff like that, realising that, you know, that isn't to say that they're not a good student. You know, it's sometimes, you know, realising that, I don't want to say people have a life outside of university, because I think everyone knows that people have a life outside of university, but I suppose just making sure that the students are able to talk to the lecturers, you know, and just say, look, I'm really struggling with this, rather than having that very much like us and them mentality. I know that if I ever had an issue, I could talk to my academic advisor and just drop her an email and just say, look, I'm having issues with this, and she'd get back to me when she could. But then I also need to appreciate that she also has however many other students that she's got to deal with, and she's got a family of her own. So it does go both ways. But I've had wholly positive experiences with my lecturers, understanding that, you know, when I was struggling with my mental health, like early on after I don't want to say the pandemic hit, because it kind of hit before I even started the course, but when they cancelled our first placement block, and I was, you know, on Teams call just crying, and she was like, right, what can I do to help you? You know, realising that she wasn't just, my academic advisor wasn't just there just as my academic advisor. That was her role predominantly, but realising that she was also there to say, look, what can I do to help you? Because if I can help you outside of your academics, it's going to then obviously help you with your academics. You're going to be able to achieve the things that I know you can achieve. So, yeah. I probably didn't really answer your question. I do apologise.
No, that was perfect.
No, I
A
think
bit of a tangent.
you definitely did, and I think quite nicely, Charlie, you've shined quite a nice light, if you want, on lecturers and people who work at universities who've supported students throughout the pandemic right from the beginning. So people like Joe, who I'm sure and I know have been on the phone quite late at night helping support students. It is nice, and it isn't necessarily always part of your job, but it's something I think we all enjoy doing, and it does correlate into clinical practice, because, you know, that's how if you see someone be like that with you, you want to help other people in the same way. I think that's quite a nice thing to point out as well. And with our job, it's that technical versus fluffy, isn't it? So lots of technical knowledge, but lots of fluffy, which does help with, as you said earlier, with patients going through quite a tough time. But we do see patients in their hardest, toughest times, but, you know, lots of them get through it, whether it is for treatable but not curable cancers, or it is for radical treatments. We still see them through to the end. I'm sure you've got to know your patients quite well, haven't you?
Yeah, there's always, I think, when people said at the start, there's always patients that stick with you, and I was like, what are you on about? Like, no, there won't. There definitely are. There are patients that will stick with me. Even if I've only seen them once out of their entire course of treatment, there are patients that I will, every now and again, will pop into my head, and I'll think, oh, I wonder how they're doing, or, you know, I made a difference to them. You know, it was one of the questions I had in my interview was, you know, tell us about a time that you've, I think it was something, you know, went above and beyond to improve a patient's experience, and I knew straight away who I wanted to talk about, and it was just this patient who was quite claustrophobic. I was on my first placement block, and the joys of being a student is you're that extra pair of hands, feet, or an extra mouth, which I'm particularly good at doing, and I could just speak to her over the tannoy system and just relay like what exactly we were doing while the radiographers were going, you know, and doing all their checks and doing the scans and reading all the details out. I could just focus solely on her and make sure that she was having the best experience possible, considering she was in something that utterly terrified her. And for me, that really cemented how much use a student can be. And I know that Big Rad Tom on Twitter hates the term just a student, but I think when you start, you kind of think, oh, I'm just a student, what can I do? But you're never just a student. You know, you can be someone who's nipping to the pharmacy to go get that thing for a patient and stuff like that, you know, and you can make the difference to that patient. But in that moment, me being able to speak to that lady over the tannoy, I'm gonna remember that forever. And it was another thing that I posted on Twitter recently about a lady who wasn't she didn't have particularly good use for arms and legs, like after having suffered a stroke, and she turned to me and she just went, thank you, at the end of her treatment. I could have absolutely cried, because we had that connection, and you just think, gosh, like, I was just doing my job, but for her it clearly made a difference. And yeah, that's gonna stick with me for a long time.
I'm
I
really
think.
glad you have highlighted that, because it is something that I relay to all students, irrespective of how confident they are or how they feel about being able to support students, you know, how knowledgeable they are about radiotherapy. At the end of the day, it is that holding someone's hand, you know, helping someone lie down, helping the clinical staff, you know, talking to a patient about their day or their weekend, learning the names of their grandchildren. You know, it's all of those things that I think makes a huge difference. And something I always say to students is, if the department is very quiet, which rarely is, but, you know, if there are times maybe when it's too busy and you can't get involved in treatment setups, the impact is still as valuable for that patient if you are talking to them, if you are explaining things, if you're able to help them put their clothes on, you know. All of those things make a real difference. And I always suggest that students spend time in waiting rooms. It's a bit harder with COVID because you've got to sit 2 meters away. So initiating a conversation like that is somewhat harder. But it is a really valuable experience. And I know from my own personal experiences, a lot of what I've learned about the cancer pathway was from patients talking about their experiences and learning from them. And it's something that I know we are passionate about doing as part of the podcast. But you've highlighted it perfectly there, Charli, that, you know, your role really is instrumental in improving people's experiences. And that's patients and staff. You know, the ability that you have to be able to have a positive impact is really, really important. So, Charli, what would be your top tips for anyone who is starting to near the end of their degree, and, you know, they're starting to think about applying for a job, going for an interview, they're already absolutely petrified of getting in those final assessments, but they know, lingering in the back of their head is, oh no, I've got to get a job. What advice are you going to give them?
Well, I think I'd be remiss in not mentioning the New Professionals Forum that's done through the Society of Radiographers. Again, I could be wrong about when you're able to join this, but I think if you're in your final year of your degree, you can join that, and they have meetings at least every couple of months. I can't recall off the top of my head, and you can stay in that forum until potentially 2 years after graduating. And so that's a really handy sort of support network to have, because you've had the experience of people who are going through their preceptorship, going through their induction, people who are also applying at the same time as you, people who have gone through the application. And that's really beneficial, because you can just go, oh guys, like, I'm having a problem with this, or I'm having a problem with that, or any recommendations on this. You know, you can just say, oh, you know, I know that I'm going to have to do this for an interview, for example. And people can go, oh, actually, I had to do something like that, and this is how I did this, and oh, this is how I did that, or I found this really beneficial. And I found that, I think I was already in the student forum for the society, but Nicola very kindly suggested that I joined the New Professionals Forum, which was really, really handy, and that's definitely helped bolster me in my applications. And it was one of the first places I told that I had my job. Which was really, really exciting. You know, looking on Rad Twitter as well, because it might be that you know, that's the first place that a role gets advertised, for example, and you could actually not stay ahead of the curve, but ultimately you are sometimes going to be competing against people who you know for a job, and that is kind of the harsh reality of the career that we're going into. So, you know, if you've got an extra day or so to potentially like polish that application, that may be the difference between it. Also, speak to the people that you're working with on your placement, particularly if you're going to be applying for a job at your placement site. But it could be that they've had a job at the place that you know before that you're applying to, or they might actually go, well, if you get a question like this is really handy, this is a really good way to answer it, you know. And don't dismiss any not negative information, but like constructive criticism that they have, and say, oh, I completely fluffed up this question answer. This is how I should have answered it, but this is how I answered it, you know, and this is how I could improve on it. Again, you know, you said that it's always quite busy in the department, particularly, you know, with backlogs of COVID and stuff like that. But if you get the chance to do, you know, spend half an hour offset, you know, chatting away to one of the band 5s, band 6s, and just say, you know, do you mind glancing an eye over my personal statement? You know, I have to thank Naman very kindly for looking over my personal statement. You know, I don't think I would have got the role at Macclesfield had it not been for him, you know, but just, you know, getting input from all different places. And if, like me, you've got that slightly more life experience and slightly less of the academic experience because you've, you know, you've had slightly more life to live for your application, absolutely, you know, talk about that in an application. You know, most of my answers in my interview were based off working in care, because I was able to transfer that. You know, so if you don't feel like you can answer so much on necessarily your radiotherapy experience, it doesn't have to just be about your time in radiotherapy, because it shows that you're a more well-rounded person if you can draw in inspiration and experiences from your wider sphere of knowledge. Again, I'm not entirely sure if I've answered the question there, but I just sort of rambled on again.
No, you definitely have. Thank you. And I think touching on sort of drawing your experiences outside of radiotherapy, from my experience having been the interviewer, that's always quite nice to see, because it's that life experience and just taking it outside, because that all kind of develops into your clinical experience. So yeah, you definitely did. And congratulations again for your job starting soon. But yeah, thank you to everyone who's been listening. So your hosts today have been Layman Jorgensen and Joe McNamara. A huge thank you again to our guest Charli Parvin. So head over to our YouTube page to see a live recording of this podcast, and you can also see the medals that Charli's got in the background. If you are utilising this podcast for CPD purposes, consider the reflective questions we've posted, along with any links to resources and literature that we've discussed. To receive your accredited CPD certificate, please complete the Google form linked with the podcast. Our next guest to feature will be Beverly Hardin, and she will be discussing her role within Health Education England and the projects and research that she oversees. So thank you all for listening, and take care.